Hey everyone, Phoebe Rizzo, talking to the void one more time, and, well, could literally be talking to an empty space here. The Invisible Man. So, this is the 2020 movie that came out just before the world ended, and it does a very good job at doing what it does. Now, Universal has been for a while trying to re-kick off a lot of its more famous monsters, most infamously in the Dark Universe series, which I touched on briefly in my Mummy review. Maybe not so briefly. But this kind of went in a sort of a different direction that, I mean, while Dracula Untold was the original launch point, wasn't really that eye-catching of a movie, so it was set pushed aside, and they began again with The Mummy, which was, I believe, an $80 million fiasco. So, after that debacle, what rather than risk trying to set up another cinematic disaster, they and then they gave the rights to The Invisible Man to Blumhouse, which is sort of infamous for making horror movies rather cheaply with mixed results. Sometimes they do really well, sometimes they do not so. But they're known for doing it. So while this has essentially, I think, a tenth of the budget that the Mummy had, I think it had all of 8 million, while the Mummy was 80. So, and despite that, this one's the better film by a long shot. So, I suppose when your antagonistic is invisible, you can save a little bit on effects there, but they don't just cop out and simply have it being empty spaces the whole time. They really switch it up with how the Invisible Man is portrayed, particularly when his invisibility falters a little. So, the story of the Invisible Man, they definitely updated it for the modern day. Way back when, it was pretty much a mad scientist who used a serum to turn himself invisible. And while it was, I believe, irreversible or kept getting longer and longer, then it eventually drove him mad and he became sort of a psychopath. Now, this one updates it to the modern age as rather than being a mad scientist with a serum, it's mostly a technological based invisibility. Essentially, it's like a suit with cameras and projection that makes him invisible. It doesn't really go into the science of how, and it doesn't have to. It gives you just enough to understand it without bogging you down with too many details, which would probably fall apart under closer examination anyway. Also, the storytelling style adds a lot to it, as you're pretty much dropped right into the action and are trying to keep up with what's going on, but in a good way. The opening scenes of this film are rather tense, and that's even before anything supernatural starts happening. So, the plot. Cecilia is a woman who's escaping from her abusive scientist boyfriend, and then manages to run away from him and then goes into hiding. A couple weeks later, it's reported that he has killed himself, and she's going to be inheriting all of his money. But then strange things start happening. I should say, in the meantime, she's become essentially a shut-in recluse, so paranoid of going outside that she's afraid he'll find her. After she accepts the money, well, strange things start happening. Things start appearing, disappearing, moving, and she feels like she's being watched. It does a good job from the beginning of making you seem like she's just imagining a lot of this, or because of her delicate mental state, that it's no wonder everyone's dismissing her claims that there's an invisible predator around. It pretty much takes the stalker ex-boyfriend trope and ranks it up to 11, and it does a very good job at that, particularly with how Elizabeth Moss' portrayal of Cecilia is increasingly erratic and desperate throughout it. Um, and pretty much it's her trying to convince people that he's found her again and just no one can see him because he was a scientist of optics, so he designed a way to make him invisible. And it pretty much goes from there of her trying to find a way to either reveal him or get out from under his thumb. I won't really spoil too much of how it plays out because it's kind of a fun way to see how it goes. Um, then the Invisible Man himself is played by Oliver Jackson Cohen, who he could play a role like this in his sleep. Really, most it's not too far off from his role in The Haunting of Bly Manor, and he's a good intimidating presence while being oddly charming at the same time. So he could really do a role like this effortlessly. Not saying he's sleepwalking through it because he's not. He's turning in a very good performance for what little he's actually on screen. I mean, he's deliberately left in the shadows in the beginning, which I think is a good choice. And then since he's mostly invisible, it does kind of an is he, isn't he thing for a while there. But when his character is on camera, he is doing a very good job and being intimidating. And it's good to see Aldous Hodge in anything. So he plays the family, a police officer who Elizabeth Moss's character is staying with, and it's always fun to see him play off of people. So Aldous Hodge is always enjoyable. So it's got a very good cast, and they mesh really well together in this. I've seen a lot of complaints online about plot holes for the movie, but really, it just makes you more think a little bit. I mean, almost any of the plot holes can really be just kind of filled in with because he's invisible or because he's rich. Either way, it can solve a lot of the main problems, except for the institute issues, but I'll get into that in a second. I mean, it doesn't explicitly say how he sent emails on her behalf, but really, if you just think about it, an invisible man standing behind you will see your passwords, see all your access things. It can do anything, which is a level that kind of updates it to the modern age again, which they didn't really touch on, I think, in the originals. It's been forever since I've seen them, but and also when he how he faked his death is never explicitly explained, but again, given the people who he's are willing to work with him, it's a cover up is not outside of the realm of believability here. And again, he has some connections too, particularly his attorney brother. Um, the main thing of how that might not hold up under it is security camera footage, but a lot of the areas that he's operating in don't really have too much of that, with the exception of the mental asylum that Cecilia gets eventually checked into. But at that point, things are escalating so fast that it's sort of a moot point anyway, because that is pretty much becoming the final chase, and whether or not he could always disappear again very effectively, pun intended. So I really did enjoy this one. It is crushingly tense at times, but in an enjoyable way. It's as you just are watching essentially a train wreck slowly unfold. As you know what's going on, but only you and the main character do. So you feel her frustration. She can't get people to believe that yes, there's someone here with us. And then she always sounds crazy because she has a way to prove it, but I can't say it right now because he's listening. He's right here. So you know how crazy she sounds, but you know that's how right she is. I do wish they would have played up with a little bit more of the is it, isn't it aspect a little bit more into the beginning, because they do kind of telegraph very clearly that yes, something is actually happening. They pretty much show things moving on their own right away, or his breath appearing from nowhere, even when no one else is seeing it. So it would have been interesting to see it from that angle, where it's a little bit more ambiguous on whether or not she's crazy or not. This one's directed by Lee Wannell, and I think he wrote it also. Which, well, I'm a big fan of everything he's involved in, from the Saw series to Insidious, so I think he is also Yeah, those are the main ones that I recall him from. But Lee Wannell's a guy to watch in the horror genre, and I'm a big fan in general. So I do recommend this movie, and I will say the ending is particularly notable here. They, well, for one, first off, they don't presume the cinematic universe again, and they just did their own thing, made their own film, and didn't worry about connecting it to anything. But for how it ends, they leave some points sort of ambiguous. I mean, it heavily implies the way one thing goes and whether or not one character's death is justified or not. But it's kind of leaves it up in the air of maybe a character is a little bit more innocent than they could otherwise be perceived. So the comeuppance they get, whether or not it's deserved, is left a little ambiguous, and I like that. It kind of makes you a little unsure. So I do recommend this film pretty highly. I'm actually going to give this one a 5 MacGuffins. It was very well put together. I was kind of wavering on whether to do 4 or 5, but it was a very enjoyable film. So give it a full 5. So do check it out. I do recommend it. Any of the bad taste from the dark universe thing, you can set that all aside. This one does it well. Well, I know this one's technically going to be posted early in 2021, but this effectively was supposed to be my last video of 2020, as I watched the film yesterday, but didn't get a chance to get around to recording till today. So, January, I mentioned I'm going to be doing a bit more of a theme. It's Phoebe's birthday month, so I'm going to try to let myself off the hook a little bit and just watch some old favorites. So I'm going to be reviewing some movies that I just held a special place in my heart, or I just want to watch again. So, a little less of the random streaming service pulls, a bit more quality movies, but don't worry, I'm going to be torturing myself with some bad ones yet again in short enough order. So, stay tuned for that, and hope to see everyone back here. Take care.